So next up, we are going to look at a session with Jim Marous coming up in just a moment. So we are going to get technical. We're going to talk about the chicken and the egg. Stay with me here. It is the incumbent financial institutions. Is it them? Is it the innovative startups or the big techs who will drive the future of banking? Is it fintech or is it tech fin? That's a big one. I wonder, we all say fintech so much. Imagine if we all started saying fintech years ago. As consumer expectations show no sign of letting up, our industry is doubling down on innovation efforts, including collaborating with emerging fintech providers to address accelerating and irreversible trends that are shaping client needs. As such, the race is officially on to provide digital solutions that can bring the best data, advanced analytics, and financial technology together to create premium personalised offerings and seamless experiences. But how can fintech or banks partnered with tech startups withstand the challenge from those giants, those tech giants like Amazon, Google, Apple, Facebook, Alibaba, Tencent, and others? There are so many of them now. Joining us now to explore are two of the brightest minds in banking. Head of Citi Ventures and Chief Innovation Officer at Citigroup, Vanessa Calleia, and Global Head of Customer Solutions at BBVA, Derek White. As head of Citi Ventures, Vanessa is focused on igniting change and reimagining solutions that drive economic progress for her clients. Deeply integrated with Citi colleagues, clients, and the innovation ecosystem, the business within a business that she runs accelerates and discovers new sources of value by exploring, incubating, and investing in those big new ideas. Vanessa has held roles in venture investing and previously ran marketing for the company's North American Consumer Bank. In 2017 and 18, she was recognised as the Global Corporate Venture Power List and was named on the Institutional Investors FinTech Finance list from 2015 to 2018. Derek White, who'll be chatting to her, is the head of BBA's Global Customer Solutions area, responsible for delivering the transformation and excellence in product and services to the BBVA customer. Prior to BBVA, Derek spent time with British giant Barclays, where he was an early member of the startup online bank, as well as leading the UK bank's digital banking initiative, and it is a great one at Barclays. To chair this timely discussion, a good friend of mine, Jim Marous, named one of the most influential people in banking and a top 5 financial services artificial intelligence influencer. To follow, Jim is internationally recognised industry futurist. He is co-publisher of the Financial Brand and owner and publisher of the Digital Banking Report. He is a sought-after speaker, author, and recognised authority on the disruption in the financial services industry. Disrupt yourself, Jim always says. He has been featured by international press and has spoken to audiences worldwide. He has advised the White House on banking policy and is followed by more than 250,000 people on Twitter and LinkedIn, including me. He is also an absolute sports fanatic, I can tell you that. Please join me in welcoming Vanessa Calleia, Derek White, and Jim Marous. Hey! Woo!
Hey.
Enjoy.
Thanks.
Hey. So, fintech or tech fin? You know, that's a question that's been asked quite a bit, especially as we look at the disruption that's being caused by, or the potential disruption caused by the large tech companies. In an earlier session today, we found that in a survey of the bankers in the room, what was the threat that was biggest for all the bankers? And looking at, was it the fintechs, was it the other financial institutions, whether small banks or the big banks, or were they the tech fins, the Googles, the Amazons, the Apples of the world? And overwhelmingly, 57% of the people in the room said it was the big tech companies. Now, that's a relatively recent phenomenon. I mean, it was fintech just recently. From the perspective of how you both work with organizations and looking at investments, what are you looking at? And is the big tech firms the people that are the most threatening to you, or are they just another one in the mix? Vanessa?
Thanks, Jim. I think what's really important in this space is to understand that it's probably not an or, it's an and. There's not one company that's going to take over all of finance globally. It's important to really think a lot about partnerships. So when we look at the space, we look at small companies, we look to our clients, we look to understand what is it that together we can do to push the ecosystem forward. I think anyone who thinks it's just an individual dot doesn't happen. I mean, look at everyone who's here, right? Everyone here recognizes it's going to take a whole village of people who have tax expertise, financial expertise, who understand big companies, small companies, to bring better client experiences to the bear.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And it's not only who or where the competition's coming from, but what the competition is attacking. Because the fundamental model for banking has changed dramatically from what was a human-to-human engagement, where branches were placed or bankers would contact with clients in a human-to-human model. And that's fundamentally changing in the way that people and businesses are interacting with money. And if you look at that, tech is coming at very, very high-frequency interactions that are relatively low value, whereas banking has evolved out of hugely valuable interactions that were low volume. And so we're both attacking this same kind of space as to how people and individuals as well as businesses are interacting with money as we move forward. And it's both the startups that are attacking in a very narrow space and the big tech that are attacking in a big ecosystem space.
Well, it's interesting because, what's interesting about the tech fins is that you have culture that's already in the technology field, and BBVA was probably, your leader was probably the first one that ever said, we're a technology company that just happens to be a bank. Culturally, that's a big deal. It's a nice catchphrase, but the reality is, when anybody asks me, in the United States, what are the most innovative companies, BBVA is always near the top of my list, and they ask why, and I say, it's because they haven't been led by a banker in quite some time. Is that a big difference? Is that a real big differentiator as you guys look at the overall marketplace, do you think?
It's not a big difference. It's a massive difference. Absolutely huge. To have a chairman that's been an executive chairman of the bank for over 17 years, so you've got stability and consistency at the top, that started his career as a programmer, who in his day had essentially coded more than any of us in this room have done. To have that, and then as our CEO, as a double MIT engineer, on driving and really understanding how technology and people and the way people are interacting with technology is changing banking, it's absolutely fundamental. But not only is it the leadership, but it's really distilled down into the core DNA of the organization. You talked about the evolution into a digital company. We have a very formal evolution that we've articulated, that moves from an analog bank into a digital bank, and then from a digital bank into a digital company, and metrics that actually define the maturity and the evolution from stage to stage along the way.
On the other hand, I'd say on the other hand, only because Citicorp is certainly the traditional old line bank that even from a brand standpoint and where your distribution network is, you're much more of a traditional foundation. How does that change? I mean, how do you build an organization that's built around a traditional bank into a much more innovative organization?
Sure. I mean, I think at Citi we've got 206 years of experience in the space. What I would argue is two things are important. First, talent is everything. We often say at Citi, it's not just enough to work like an entrepreneur. You have to work with entrepreneurs. We've hired dozens of them who work with our colleagues throughout the bank to change mindset. It is a cultural change, and whether you sort of have a roadmap, as Derek described, or you have a number of different ways that you try and get at a mindset shift, right? We believe that change in this space is not just about the technology. It's also really about understanding what our clients need, whether that's individual clients or institutional clients. And I think that point sometimes can get lost in this question of fin and tech, or tech and fin, that this is really about client expectations and what you're doing to continue to exceed those expectations. We find that that is both a mindset shift, because you have to be thinking that much faster ahead about creating something that maybe someone doesn't even know that they need yet. And it's also a capability shift. And we work multiple ends of thinking differently about the questions that we ask, as well as differently about the kinds of people that we bring into the bank who are the next generation of leaders.
So we're at a period of innovation and transition where we're almost going now from the traditional transactions to digital banking, and now the humanization of the digital process. And that's also taken in the whole TechFin group overall. But when you look at the humanization, how do you start to balance the desire for better customer experience and humanization against cost cutting and revenue enhancement? And how do you sell that within the bank? Because traditionally, we look at all these innovations and we say, we're in it for the customer experience. But I look at everything that's being done, I go, really? I mean, even mobile deposit capture really wasn't done to make it easier for people to deposit checks. It was done so we'd be able to save money in the branches and have less transactions. So how do you sell the good customer experience, the humanization of the digital process within organizations that are truly profit and loss and quarterly statement driven?
So it's a great question, Jim, and we've actually been at this for many years. What we do at Citi is we run a program that helps employees bring ideas to the forefront that they think will improve our client experience. But instead of then those ideas getting approved and you as the big boss saying, well, here's a check to go make that happen, we run a process of validating with clients before anything gets built. This does a couple things. First of all, it ensures that the innovations that we're bringing to market are actually not just somebody's idea of what would be good, but they're something that our clients want. And second, it's actually reduced the cost of bringing these innovations to market, because the things that don't find that product market fit don't get built. So we've actually been able to balance very well that conundrum that you posed, which is, gee, how are we going to do all this stuff and how are we going to maintain an efficient and effective organization? And we do it by putting the client at the center of what we're trying to change.
So much of putting that client at the center comes from understanding understanding their behavior. And I'd suggest it's the human behavior, but it's also leadership. In our organization, there is no selling on the importance of this. It is a fundamental belief that the leading indicators are customer needs, customer behavior, and if you fulfill what the customer needs in a beautiful and amazing way, then the costs take care of themselves. Because looking at cost for cost's sake is the wrong way. It's a lagging indicator, and it's a dying way of looking at the business. Because if you look at how people today are interacting with their money, it starts with, let's be generous. The average person visits a branch maybe 10 times a year. They're visiting very generous, depending on which geography you're in, right? But they'll visit their mobile application 300 times a year. When you start to look at that quantum of interaction in the way that they're interacting with their money versus the big ecosystems, this is tying back to TechFin, it's 3,000 to 6,000 times a year. So you look at that 10, 300, 3,000 model, it's a different way of running a business. It's an understanding of the importance of not just the small screen, because the small screen is only part of it, and that's the first stage of evolution of digital. But then you start to get into making it really smart, and you start to recognize the importance of it's not just the experience, and it's not just about the money, but it's about the data that underpins that and how you bring the data into every single interaction to make it smarter. And then as you move from that, you start to get into self-driven and truly autonomous banking.
Well, I was in a session earlier this morning, and I mentioned the fact that I did a survey of bankers and said, how many of you have Amazon Prime? And it's overwhelming. I mean, I don't think anybody didn't raise their hand. And then I said, when they raised their prices by 20% at the beginning of the year, how many of you, at least for a while, thought about canceling your membership? And nobody raised their hand. But that is the application of data for the customer's benefit, to the point where they realize it's not just the shipping. It's the relationship you're developing with Amazons or whoever it may be. But Amazon's a great example. I use the concept of the fact that I order my personal care products, and it's no longer sending them, once a month, saying, oh, you probably need them around then. They keep track of how often you send them, and they remind you when it comes close to a time when they'd normally be done. Well, in the financial services industry, that kind of applies to the fact that people they don't want you to tell them what's already happened anymore. They want you to use the data to tell them what they should do. And, at Citibank, you have a new product you introduced this year that really seeks to help a consumer, be it a Citibank customer or not, do better banking and learn more on their behalf. And it was interesting because I had a person in a panel that I was on that discussed the product, and I said, yeah, but it's a great sales tool too. He goes, no, that's off the table. We're actually trying to build the relationship. The sales will come. And to your point, how did that product even come into being, where it's a product for the masses that you may or may not get them as a customer?
I mean, I think, in many ways, we all are learning from each other in this ecosystem. So as financial services companies, we learn from the tech companies and vice versa. And one of the things that the tech companies have done a great job over the years of doing is understanding, how do you appeal to the masses? How do you make sure that you're putting out product and service that is such high quality and such high caliber that people want to use it? And then over time, you figure out what's the right cohort of that whole user base that's actually going to end up being a paying customer of yours. And by taking a page out of that same book to say, our mission at Citi is to drive economic progress for our clients. So how do we do that in a broad-based way? How do we help people manage their finances? How do we help them move forward? And understand that of that whole user base, there will be a cohort of those people that over time will be Citi clients. But we can still do a great job of serving a much broader set of constituents.
You're building a platform, which is kind of exciting. And when you look at platformification, if you use that term, it goes beyond just banking services. I mean, how do you see that taking shape in the future? How do you see the whole platform basis of a bank going beyond, almost like, as the other tech companies have done?
We absolutely recognize the platformification.
Even though it's hard
to say. It wasn't easier for you than it was for me.
As a service model, just like we're serving all of our customers on a day-to-day basis, we've recently launched the first banking as a service platform in the United States, which is open platform here in the US. And that's hugely exciting. But the way we look at this battle on platforms and on customers' interaction with models, with banking and money, is three key things. Going back to your Amazon example, and the Amazon Prime example, is there's the above the glass for the customer. There's the below the glass, is with the stuff the customer doesn't see but enables real-time, beautiful, amazing experiences that are truly aligned to what the customer wants above the glass. But then the third part of it is recognizing the experience above the glass, the platform below the glass, and how you open up at a platform below the glass for others to be able to use. Once it's clean, it's pure, and it's functioning at high speed like big tech. The third part, and the hardest part, is how you truly create at speed like big tech or like fintech. The challenge of an organization that's 200 years old, and ours is 187 years old, and we have 130,000 employees, is how do you create at speed, at scale? Once you put the customer above the glass and design around their needs, and you've got a clean architecture that's sitting underneath, how you start to create at scale and at speed is the real secret sauce. We have 8,000 colleagues across 800 scrums or mini startups within the bank today. We will have 33,000 colleagues by the end of the year operating in Agile. And how you create in a way that lands product and services in the hands of the customer at a cycle of less than 9 months is the absolute secret sauce.
I just want to come back to your question about platforms for a moment. I think when we're sitting here for Money 2030, or whatever the next Money 2020 is going to be called, I think we will recognize that this notion of industry and how we all frame what we're doing is actually already outdated. We think of this as industries to ecosystems. We still think in, is it financial services? Is it tech? The most forward-looking companies in the world are not thinking with this sort of artificial mental barrier about, gee, is this what we're supposed to do? Are we supposed to provide this kind of service or that kind of service? What they're thinking about is, what does a client need? Whether that means that I create a platform, I participate on a platform, I invite other people in. There are lots of different mechanisms for getting at that. But they're thinking much more expansively about client needs, and then they're not burdened by what is frankly just kind of an artificial human construct of what this industry is supposed to provide versus that industry. And I think we will increasingly see a move towards ecosystems that make it hard to classify companies as being in one sector or another.
So you're both innovating, you both are buying organizations and partnering with them and everything else. In that whole ecosystem, you have the government involved, you have regulators involved. How do you take into account how far you can go? Both organizations work well beyond the United States, and so you have different regulators, things of this nature. Do you, let's put it this way, do you ask for permission or beg for forgiveness, knowing that you're going in the direction that the government wants you to go? Because that can be a barrier.
I think it's critically important that we play a role in the safety and soundness of the financial system on a global basis. And I often say to people, like, that is not where you want experimentation that could come with fast failure, right? That's a little bit like going to the doctor and being wheeled in for surgery and sitting there with the little paper thing on top of you that doesn't feel much like a blanket. You don't want your surgeon to come by and say, Jim, I was thinking of trying something new today. You want your surgeon to say, like, I've done this, I know how to do this, it's a tried and true methodology. And so we have put in place a lot across Citi to make sure that when we are experimenting, we're doing that within the regulatory frame that we have to operate in. We take that very seriously, and I would suggest that that is true not only of the big banks, but it's true of the smart fintechs as well. Everyone understands that these are important matters, and it's not something that you can be frivolous about, but it doesn't mean that you can't explore. It doesn't mean that you can't innovate. You've just got to do it in a way that respects those boundaries.
And I would suggest that regulation is one of the areas that brings big tech and banking together for collaboration, because the barriers of regulation is where big tech does not want to go into banking. I had meetings this morning with one of the big techs, and it's very clear where they want to play and where they don't want to play.
Yeah.
And so I think regulation is an area that brings us naturally together to define the future in co-creation. The second point I'd just make is that Europe and the regulation that's been introduced in Europe with PSD2 and GDPR, it's really exciting to see how regulation is playing a role in innovation.
Right.
By unlocking the thinking of how data can and should be shared, and the true definition of ownership of data and how that defines industries across industries is really exciting.
Okay, we got a couple seconds left. Ask you the question on that same topic. Is privacy an opportunity or a barrier to innovation right now?
Privacy is more than both. It is a necessity in building trust with customers, and trust above all else is all that matters.
I would have said very similar. I mean, it is at the core of what we do, right? Without trust, there is no financial services. And so that's something that I think you will see innovation around. And you're seeing changing behaviors as well. We've talked a lot about tech. The behavioral side of this is just as important, but it's something that you have to hold at the center.
Well, it's funny because you look at, as you said, in UK and all that, I almost see it's only a barrier if you're not giving value back for the privacy and you're not giving value back for the identity that I'm having. And consumers can become more and more involved in who they give their identity to. And those organizations that, to both of your points, give the best experiences, bring the best value to the consumer, do things on the behalf of the consumer as opposed to very obviously on behalf of themselves, are going to get the ability to leverage that identity for the benefit of all. So that's good. Thank you very much. I cannot believe how quickly that went, because I had a whole lot more questions, as you guys know, but thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great job. Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Awesome. What a great session there. I love this conversation about trust is this theme that just keeps continuing on and on and on over the last couple of days. Trust, trust, trust. And I love the exploration piece as well. I think that's so interesting.